The air hung thick with the scent of cheap paper and stale sweat, a humid breath trapped within the corrugated tin walls of the makeshift interrogation hut. Outside, the relentless Pacific sun beat down, but inside, the strange, almost reverent hush prevailed, broken only by the scratch of a pen on paper. These were not the sounds of battle, nor the expected cries of coercion. Instead, Japanese prisoners of war, men who had vowed to die rather than surrender, sat hunched over flimsy stationery, their faces contorted, not in defiance, but in a profound, unimaginable agony. They had been taught to expect unimaginable cruelty from their American captors, a brutal extension of the battlefield. Yet, what unfolded before them was a paradox so stark, so utterly alien to their understanding, it threatened to unravel the very fabric of their being. This seemingly simple gesture, the offer to write home, was not a kindness as they understood it. It was a weapon far more potent than any bullet, striking at the core of a warrior's soul. Was this a trick, a subtle American ploy to humiliate them further? Or was it, impossibly, a path to some unexpected salvation? And why, after so much bloodshed, would the enemy offer such a bewildering concession? For months, American intelligence officers had struggled. Their strategies, honed in the European theater, proved woefully inadequate against an enemy whose resolve defied conventional logic. Propaganda leaflets depicting a welcoming captivity were routinely ignored, often used as kindling or simply tossed aside. The Japanese soldier, steeped in the warrior code of Bushido, viewed capture as a fate worse than death, an indelible stain of dishonor. To surrender was to become a non-person, a ghost among the living, unworthy of family, country, or even memory. So when the offer came to put pen to paper, to craft a message for loved ones thousands of miles away, the reaction was not gratitude, but a gut-wrenching, silent explosion. The first few men simply stared at the blank pages, their hands trembling, eyes wide with a terror that transcended fear of physical pain. The American guards, initially bewildered by the lack of immediate compliance, watched as stoic faces began to crack. A low moan escaped one man, quickly stifled. Another dug his fingernails into his palms until blood bloomed crimson, a desperate attempt to anchor himself to reality. The silence in the room became charged, heavy with unspoken grief and a profound internal conflict. Each tick of the rough-hewn wall clock seemed to amplify their torment. What nobody expected was the sheer, overwhelming emotional tsunami that followed. One soldier, a young man barely out of his teens, suddenly slammed his fist on the table, a sound like a distant rifle shot in the quiet room. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down his face, blurring the lines of the paper. Soon, others followed, not with shouts or pleas, but with a silent, agonizing breakdown. Their shoulders shaking, breath hitching. The American officers, observing from a distance, saw not weakness, but a desperate, agonizing release from an unresolvable cultural paradox. The simple act of holding a pen, poised to acknowledge their survival, was to acknowledge their shame to the very people they were meant to protect with their lives. Still, the question lingered. What was the true intention behind this unprecedented leniency? Was it a genuine, if naive, attempt at human connection, or a calculated maneuver to dismantle the enemy from the inside out? The stark contrast between their indoctrination and this unexpected reality created a chasm in their minds, a space where loyalty and longing collided. The smell of ink, usually mundane, now carried the heavy scent of impossible choices. If stories real and unexpected that turn your expectations upside down intrigue you, consider subscribing to Warriors of the Homeland. You won't want to miss what happens next. With the passing of the first few days, a strange routine began to settle into the camp. The offer to write home remained, a silent, persistent invitation. American soldiers, often young men themselves, would quietly place stacks of paper and pencils on a rough wooden table in a shaded corner of the compound. There was no coercion, no demanding that letters be written, just the quiet presence of the materials, day after day. The Japanese prisoners, for their part, continued their labor, their eyes occasionally drifting towards the table, a flicker of something unreadable passing across their faces. The air remained thick with unspoken tension, a palpable weight pressing down on every man. The air remained thick with unspoken tension, a palpable weight pressing down on every man. The American guards, accustomed to the raw defiance or despondent resignation of other prisoners, found themselves observing a peculiar, almost ritualistic stoicism. The Japanese soldiers moved through their assigned duties with a quiet precision, their eyes often downcast, yet betraying an underlying vigilance. They ate the provided rations, simple but regular meals of rice, stew, and sometimes even fresh fruit, with a meticulous, almost detached focus, as if each mouthful was a calculated act of survival. The smell of the warm, plain food was a constant, unsettling presence, far removed from the deprivation they had anticipated. Yet, this wasn't the harsh, punitive captivity their training had drilled into them. There were no beatings, no forced marches beyond the camp perimeter, no deliberate starvation. Wounded prisoners, those who had survived the initial battles and were too injured to fight, were taken to a makeshift medical tent. The crisp, clean scent of antiseptic, the gentle touch of American medics applying bandages. These were details that defied every expectation. Each small act of care, each regular meal, each day without overt cruelty became another bewildering anomaly. But the silence was deceptive, a thin veneer over a churning internal world. The offer to write home, initially a violent shock, had receded slightly, but its shadow still loomed. It was a constant, unspoken challenge, a persistent whisper in the back of their minds. The blank paper on the table, shimmering faintly in the midday sun, became a symbol of an impossible choice, a silent accusation to their warrior code. Was this persistent, unexpected leniency a more insidious form of torture, designed to break their spirit not through pain, but through profound confusion? Why would their captors go to such lengths merely to observe their anguish? As the weeks bled into months, a peculiar rhythm took hold. Mornings began with the rustle of straw mats, the distant sound of American boots on gravel, and the ever-present hum of insects in the tropical air. The prisoners performed their tasks, clearing brush, mending fences, maintaining the camp, with a disciplined efficiency that surprised their captors. In the afternoons, a strange form of leisure was permitted. Sometimes old, battered playing cards would appear, or a single dog-eared book, its English text incomprehensible to most. The sight of a group of hardened soldiers attempting to decipher a foreign language or quietly playing a card game was another crumb of strangeness in a landscape of the absurd. In contrast to the structured routine, the emotional landscape remained volatile. Sometimes, late at night, a muffled sob would echo from one of the barracks, quickly stifled. The American guards, patrolling with flashlights cutting through the humid darkness, would hear it, a stark reminder of the human cost beneath the stoic facade. These were not the sounds of men planning escape or defiance, but of men wrestling with an unbearable internal burden. The humid night air, thick with the scent of tropical foliage and distant cooking fires, seemed to press down on their hidden grief. What nobody expected was the quiet dignity with which many began to navigate this new, bewildering reality. They did not embrace it, not openly, but they adapted. They observed their captors, searching for the telltale signs of deception, the moment when the mask would inevitably slip. Yet, it rarely did. The Americans, for their part, maintained a professional distance, their orders clear: observe, do not coerce, and maintain the offer of communication. The clatter of mess kits, the distant murmur of radio chatter from the American tents, all contributed to a soundscape of normalcy that felt profoundly abnormal to the Japanese prisoners. Guarda este de tal, the very absence of overt cruelty, the provision of basic dignities, created a psychological pressure far more potent than any physical torment. It chipped away at the ingrained certainties of their world, leaving them adrift in a sea of paradox. Every gesture of unexpected humanity from their captors deepened the chasm between their indoctrination and their lived experience. They were alive, they were fed, they were even offered the chance to connect with home, an act that, by their code, should be impossible. En cuanto hizo, the American intelligence officers continued their meticulous observations. They weren't looking for battlefield secrets in these early stages, but for patterns, for cracks in the psychological armor. They noted the subtle shifts in posture, the fleeting expressions, the moments when a man's gaze would linger on the paper and pencils, a silent battle playing out behind his eyes. The why of this perplexing situation remained elusive for the prisoners. But for the Americans, a deeper understanding of their adversary was slowly, painstakingly emerging. The true test lay not in physical discomfort, but in unseen battles of the mind. The Bushido Code, demanding death over capture, was a formidable barrier. Yet American officers persisted, understanding the human heart's yearning for connection. The simple wooden table, with its paper and pens, became a psychological crucible, waiting for a spark. One sweltering afternoon, the camp fell uncharacteristically quiet. A corporal, his face etched with battle weariness, approached the table. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step a defiance. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows that mirrored his internal torment. He picked up a pen, its cool metal a stark contrast to his clammy fingers. The rough paper, translucent in the light, felt alien, a canvas for an act he believed impossible. He sat down, back ramrod straight, shoulders slumped. For long minutes, he stared at the blank page, a silent war behind his eyes. Jungle sounds, a bird's chirp, seemed impossibly loud in his profound silence. With a shuddering breath, he lowered the pen. It hovered, a needle poised. The first word, a character for mother, formed with a hand so violent the ink bled slightly on the page. What followed was not an immediate outpouring, but a slow, agonizing unraveling. Each pen stroke tore at his resolve. The quiet scratch of the nib was the only sound, a relentless rhythm of confession and despair. His stoic face began to contort. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime, landing on the paper like a dark, accusing flower. He tried to stifle it, to regain control, but the dam had broken. Soon he was weeping openly, his body shaking with convulsive sobs. It was a sound stripped bare of pretense, an ancient lament. Other prisoners, who had pretended not to notice, now stole glances, their faces reflecting horror and understanding. American guards, watching from a distance, saw not a defeated enemy, but a man profoundly broken by an impossible choice. The threat, they understood, was never physical. It was forcing these men to confront existence's ultimate paradox. To live was to dishonor, yet to die was to abandon. This was the pivotal moment, the symbolic turn. The letter, once an administrative offer, became a crucible. For the Japanese soldier, writing home was profound shame, acknowledging survival and failure to uphold Bushido. Yet, it was an unbearable release, a desperate plea for connection from a soul adrift in cultural contradiction. The simple act of putting pen to paper shattered the rigid doctrine that had held them captive. The American strategy, far from crude, had found its most potent weapon in a gesture of unexpected, almost cruel compassion. Respira. If this profound cultural clash and its unexpected consequences resonate with you, the Warriors of the Homeland channel offers a complimentary episode delving deeper into the psychological operations of the Pacific Theater. You can find it linked in the description. This agonizing breakdown, repeated by others, offered American intelligence officers an unprecedented window. It wasn't about the letter's content, though some wrote, their words coded with loss and duty. It was about profound insight into the enemy's psyche. The silence, once defiance, now testified to unbearable internal struggle. The humid air in the huts, once thick with tension, now carried the faint, metallic scent of tears. The initial loop of the threat, "Is this a trick or salvation?" was now closed. It was neither trick nor salvation. It was far more nuanced and devastating, a profound psychological challenge, exposing their doctrine's immense human cost. The fragile humanity beneath the Japanese soldiers' unwavering resolve was laid bare, not by force, but by the quiet invitation to remember what they had lost. But the larger question remained: why did the enemy do this? What did the Americans hope to gain from such empathy? The legacy of these tear-soaked tables was just beginning. It would leave more than letters. It would fundamentally reshape future strategies, from psychological operations exploiting human vulnerability to a deeper understanding informing post-war occupation and reconstruction. This quiet, agonizing scene, repeated countless times, forged a new understanding of the conflict. It recognized a shared human capacity for immense sacrifice and profound, unbearable grief. American officers, initially detached, confronted the raw humanity of their adversaries. This shift in perception, born from writing home, would reverberate far beyond the war itself. The American strategy, honed by campaigns in Europe, found itself ill-equipped for this new, unfamiliar enemy. Conventional coercion yielded nothing but defiance. Propaganda leaflets, depicting a welcoming captivity, were routinely ignored or destroyed. But the offer to write home, a cornerstone of Western POW rights, collided head-on with the Japanese warrior code of Bushido, where capture was a fate worse than death. This was the unique mechanism, not brute force, but an unexpected compassion that shattered a doctrine built on absolute sacrifice. The why of the American approach was not born of naive idealism, but of a calculated, brutal necessity. Intelligence officers understood that to truly defeat an enemy, one must first understand them. The letters themselves, often censored, rarely yielded direct tactical intelligence. Their true value lay in the profound insight they offered into the enemy's psyche, the raw, unedited humanity beneath the propaganda caricatures. The desperate, agonizing release witnessed at those tables was a window into the immense psychological toll of their doctrine, a fragility hidden beneath unwavering resolve. This unprecedented observation began to reshape future strategies. It wasn't about the words on the page, but the tears that fell upon them, the shaking hands that wrote them. The American military began to grasp that the Japanese soldier, while formidable, was not an unfeeling machine. They carried the same burdens of family, the same longing for connection, the same capacity for grief as any other human being. This understanding would inform not only psychological operations designed to exploit this very human vulnerability, but also a deeper, more empathetic approach to conflict. Decades later, the echoes of those quiet, tear-soaked tables would resonate far beyond the battlefields. The insights gained from those moments of profound emotional breakdown would inform the post-war occupation and reconstruction of Japan. It wasn't merely about imposing victory, but about building a lasting peace, a task that required understanding the defeated, not just conquering them. The legacy was not just a handful of letters, but a fundamental reevaluation of the enemy, a recognition of the shared human capacity for both immense sacrifice and profound, unbearable grief. The experience proved that even in the crucible of war, the simplest human gesture could become the most potent and devastating weapon. It altered the perception of the conflict and its participants, moving beyond simplistic narratives of good versus evil to a complex understanding of human resilience and vulnerability. The act of writing home, once a symbol of shame, became a silent testament to the enduring power of human connection, even across the deepest divides of war. It was a lesson in the unexpected, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most effective path to victory lies not in overwhelming force, but in the quiet, insistent pressure of a truth too painful to bear. The humid air in those huts, once thick with the scent of fear and defiance, had been replaced by the metallic tang of tears and the faint, almost sweet smell of ink on paper. Silencio por un instante. For those eager to dive deeper into the hidden mechanisms of history and continue exploring stories that reveal the profound human element in conflict, access the complete playlist on Warriors of the Homeland and save the dossier in the pinned comment. The world watched a warrior nation, seemingly unbreakable, yield not to bullets, but to the unbearable weight of a blank page and the unspoken promise of a letter home. That simple, stark contrast, the expectation of cruelty met with the quiet invitation to remember, remains a powerful reminder. The scratch of a pen on paper, once a sound of torture, became the rhythmic beat of a broken heart, forever changing how one side understood the other.